The Vietnam War was a conflict between the Communist government of North Vietnam and its allies against the government of South Vietnam and its main ally, the United States. It was part of a much larger regional conflict and part of the Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union. The Cold War was a conflict between the United States and Soviet Union as the US believed in free market and democracy, while the Soviet Union believed in single communist rule. Following World War II, Vietnam fought against France for their independence, and under Ho Chi Minh, they declared independence and a Democratic Republic of Vietnam under him. However, the state of Vietnam was set up and the Emperor Bao did not want any connections to communism, thus creating two separate halves with different rules. The U.S. deployed non-combatant personnel as part of the Military Assistance Advisory Group to train the Republic of Vietnam and to oppose the spread of communism. Similarly, the Soviet Union began helping communist allies inside of North Vietnam, now called the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. Containment was a U.S. policy that vowed to stop the spread of communism, and the domino theory, originally thought by Eisenhower, was a belief that if one country fell to communism, neighboring countries would fall as well. The war escalated during the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where North Vietnamese torpedo boats fired at two U.S. ships. President Lyndon B. Johnson requested Congress to take immediate action in response to the attack. Congress allowed him to take unnecessary measures and gave him a blank check, which allowed him to spend whatever he wanted on the war. Later in February 1965, the U.S. began dropping on North Vietnam in an operation known as Operation Rolling Thunder. It began attacking military targets and later civilians. The U.S. also began deploying more soldiers into Vietnam, which intensified the conflict. The United States mostly fought a war of attrition and were primarily focused on inflicting heavy damage and tried to destroy enemy supply lines to slow them down and so they can no longer fight. So dropped bombs and targeted military bases, transportation networks, and air defenses. But these were not successful as they did not stop the flow of supplies. They were also deployed on the ground to locate enemy soldiers and engage in warfare. They also used chemicals like Agent Orange, which was an attempt at getting rid of the cover of the jungle so their enemies would be easier to spot. Also used napalm, which was a highly flammable substance which would catch on fire easily. Viet Cong was a guerrilla force that had previously assassinated Vietnamese government officials and any people associated with it. Led by communists, but not everyone was communist, as some people just wanted to oppose the dictatorial regime. They aimed to overthrow Diem and reunify Vietnam. They were trained by North Vietnam and infiltrated through the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Viet Cong mostly used guerrilla warfare, and they would ambush and sabotage enemies. They would mostly attack at night, launching sneak attacks and then retreat into jungles, and they would disguise themselves as citizens, so it would be hard to tell them apart. They would use punji sticks, which were sticks of bamboo with very sharp points and were sometimes smeared with feces in order to cause infection, often hidden under pits, which would cause the American soldiers to fall and get impaled by the sticks. They also used snake pits, which were commonly used inside of the tunnel. They would trigger a tripwire, which would release snakes, which were sometimes poisonous and were also hidden in trees. They used bamboo whips, which were pieces of bamboo with spikes attached, and when triggered would snap and hit the person that triggered the trap. They also dug underground tunnels, which could be used to retreat and hide. They would also have food, hospitals, and more ammunition, and the soldiers could rest there. The most famous example of the underground tunnels is the Chu Chi tunnels, which spanned for more than 250 kilometers. Other things like food, hospitals, places to sleep, ammunition, and had traps. They would also use psychological warfare throughout the war, with the most famous example being Hanoi Hannah. She often made broadcasts in an attempt to scare away enemy soldiers and would read out the names of killed or captured American soldiers. They would also play anti-war songs in an attempt to make the soldiers feel like the war was unfair or unjust. They would also not use uniforms most of the time to blend in with the citizens. The American soldiers would be confused on who actually attacked them. So used their terrain to their advantage, like mountains and jungles. They were more familiar with the landscape. Famous example was a Tet Offensive, where during a ceasefire, the Viet Cong launched surprise attacks all over South Vietnam at the same time, which shocked the American public. Challenges the U.S. faced during the war was that to fight against traps, ambushes, and guerrilla warfare that the Viet Cong used. The Vietnamese also fought in a way that was very unusual, for the US soldiers to go against, as they used guerrilla warfare and would attack and run away, which was very different from the way the United States fought. Also hide inside of tunnels, which were often difficult to spot, and that allowed for the Vietnamese to launch sneak attacks on the Americans. They also had difficulty distinguishing Viet Cong soldiers from normal civilians, as they often wore regular clothes. They also faced difficult terrains like jungles and difficult weather like high temperatures, and they were also not used to fighting in those types of areas. There was also a lot of anti-war protests going back in the United States. Casualties and the draft system made people angry, and they began losing more trust in the government. When the US also began opposing the war due to news coverage, as they saw the napalms and heard of the events like the My Lai massacre, where the US soldiers attacked unarmed and led to the deaths of over 300 civilians. The Vietnam War ended in January 1973 after the United States and North Vietnam made a peace agreement called the Paris Peace Agreement, in which the United States agreed to slowly withdraw the American soldiers from Vietnam. However, conflict between North and South Vietnam still continued up until April 1975, when the Democratic Republic of Vietnam captured Saigon. The war had devastating effects on Vietnam. 2 million Vietnamese died, 3 million wounded, and around 12 million became refugees. The country also became very financially unstable, and the rebuilding was very slow. Agent Orange also had devastating effects on both sides, as it caused cancer, health issues, and birth defects to people exposed to it. The U.S. also faced severe effects, as they spent over $120 billion on the war. Veterans also faced backlash from people in favor and against the war. And by the end of the war, there was around 58,000 Americans missing or killed.
GI, your government has abandoned you. They have ordered you to die. GI, do not trust them. Defect, GI. It is a very good idea to leave a sinking ship. They lie to you, GI. You know you cannot win this war. Your rich leaders grow richer while you die in the swamp, GI. They will give you a medal, GI, but only after you are dead. Your government lies to you every day, poor soldier. You have lost this war, GI. Your army will leave you behind. Imperialists make you fight this war, GI. They do not care about you. GI, your government has betrayed you. You will not return for you. GI, your airplanes bomb your own men.
Thanks for watching the video. I hope you learned something about Vietnam.